Welcome, everyone. I'm excited that you're all here today. My name is Marty McCarthy, and I'm going to be leading this workshop. Hopefully, if you like this workshop, we're going to be doing them every month. My background is really a Wall Street background. I started a money management firm in my 20s. I retired when I was 36, and that's when the wheels fell off. I got really depressed and anxious because I didn't have any purpose left. And I spent 8 years trying to figure out how do people get happy again. So I did the standard thing. I went to the doctor and I got some pills. 24 prescriptions later, and 50 pounds later, and lost sex drive later, I said, this isn't working. And that was when I started studying my body medicine. And I went to Harvard to study positive psychology, and that's what flipped the switch for me. And that was when I learned you can actually learn how to be happier. And a lot of people aren't very happy. So now my new lease on life is that I actually became a teacher, which is not what I expected to do. So I've been teaching at Harvard Extension entrepreneurship classes for almost 10 years. And the last 3 years I've been teaching nano courses at Hult. But it was only about a month ago that I started teaching in person on campus. And that's where this idea came from. And I'd like to introduce you to CJ Jeffries, who's also going to be presenting with me tonight.
Hi, guys. I found my way to positive psychology through a bit of a different route. I actually am not yet retired, but I originally became interested in positive psychology because when I graduated from school, I went to math camp, and I moved over to Italy and was working with a startup travel company at the time. And so I was working with all of these study abroad students, and we had bus full of students. And I found myself going down to the Amalfi Coast for the third weekend in a row in Italy, beautiful place, and it was raining yet again. And so I learned, I got a little creative with trying to affect the mood of the students on the bus because I really wanted great reviews by the end of the weekend. And long story short, I learned that what I was doing was turning out what was working and kind of turning that into a process and working out with students, which was just the tip of the iceberg for positive psychology. So I follow that to a program that came out of Harvard, but we in conjunction with the yoga ashram in Berkshire, so it's positive psychology and mindfulness. And now I am a coach who focuses on strengths-based leadership and strengths-based personal development. So I'm just chatting.
All right, so why I'm here today is a weird thing happened on the first day of class. And I was teaching freshmen. I was excited to do that because I just came out of high school, and there might be some new minds that I could help mold from the beginning. No old habits to get rid of. And I mentioned my bio that I gave to you. But what surprised me was on the second day, 11 students came to me and said, I have an anxiety problem. Can you help me? Well, I'm not a therapist and I'm not licensed, so I basically told them what worked for me. And I suggested some books. That was the second day of class. And I was sitting having dinner that night, and I thought, you know, I have 100 students. 11 came to me 2 days into the class. That's 11%. But they were all women. And the depression rate and anxiety rate between men and women is almost equal. Women are higher, but I think men lie. I think it's actually about half and half. So I thought, I think this number is double. I think it might be 20%. So I went to Gonzalo, the dean of postgrad, and I told him what I discovered. And his eyes got huge. And I said, Gonzalo, that's 20%. I go, at what point do we call this an epidemic? And he said, what do you suggest? I said, well, I was lucky enough that I went to Harvard's most popular class in their history. 1,200 students took a positive psychology class. It was like a rock concert. It was amazing. And CJ and I had the same professor, Tal Ben Shahar. He was an amazing guy. I said, Gonzalo, I actually still have all the material. I could reteach this class here. And he said, go for it. So we did a course proposal with Monica's help. So next fall, we should have something. And Monica's pushing to make it even faster. So it might start in summertime. But I said, Gonzalo, you know, between now and summertime, you know, I appreciate you fast tracking it, but statistically, I wouldn't be surprised if we had a suicide this academic year with the number of students that we have. This wouldn't be a surprise. So I said, could we do these monthly workshops and get this rolling now? And he said, yes, which is why you're here. However, everything I'm going to be showing you is science-based. It's not just opinions, there's actually data behind it. And I wanted to research my 20% number to see if I was right, because it wasn't really a scientific study. But I want to poll the room, so I'm going to ask you to raise your hand when I hit the number that corresponds to what you're thinking. So when you raise your hand, please look around the room so that you can all gauge. And CJ's better at counting than I am, so I'm going to ask you to kind of just sort of like roughly count where the group is. So raise your hand if you think that 10% of American college students in the United States, 10% have an anxiety problem, about 10%. I'm going up to 100, so we're going to start at 10. Yeah. No, if you think it's 10 and no higher, then just do for 10. So if you think it's just around 10, okay? You think it's around 20. That was the number that I calculated, around 20. 30. Okay, 40. Yep, 50. 60. 70. 80. 90. And 100. Okay, you're all a lot smarter than me because I went to Harvard Medical School's website to find out what is the real number. It's 63%. I thought 20 was an epidemic, and I wasn't sure. Is that still an epidemic? Like, what number is an epidemic? 63? That means everyone here over isn't having the greatest time in the world. And it doesn't have to be that way. This could be the best years of your life. Actually, every year of your life could be the best year of your life. And I was 45 by the time I figured this out. If I can teach you what I learned at your age, I could save you 20 years of misery, 20 years of drug and alcohol abuse, 20 years of going to a shrink that just says, oh, tell me more about that. Why do you think that? This is the only thing that has ever worked for me, besides changing my diet and doing a lot of aerobic exercise. Between eating the right foods, doing exercise every day, and changing the way I look at life, now I'm happier than I've ever been. But I didn't have to wait this long. But here I am. Now here's the agenda. We're going to share with you what positive psychology is. We're going to gauge how happy you are right now. We're actually going to give you some exercises that have been scientifically proven to work that you can do now and take home with you. And then I'm going to share with you some business applications because there's actually economic benefit and business applications to learning positive psychology. So this is Dr. Marty Seligman. When he became the president of the American Psychology Association, he had to do one big project. And his big project was creating positive psychology. He's pretty much known as the father of positive psychology. Now, what he noticed as a therapist is that the best he could do with depressed patients was to get them undepressed. They weren't happy, they weren't depressed, but they were just flat. And he thought, okay, is this as good as life gets? Or could we get these people into a happier camp? And what he discovered is that if you study people who are happier and have well-being, you can learn what they do and change. You can actually remap the way your brain works. Now, this is an interesting study. This is on a scale of 1 to 7. How happy are you? Forbes magazine looked at the richest 300 Americans. They came out 5.8 out of 7. So they didn't hit 7, 5.8. International college students, pretty much this population, about a point less. Doesn't seem bad, right? You're not a billionaire, maybe another billion will get you a point. However, this is what disturbs me. You're slightly better off than Calcutta slum dwellers. Think about that. This is a high GDP country. Calcutta slum dwellers don't have income, don't have housing, but they're only a little bit less happy than this population. So there is a loose correlation with money, but there's actually a lot more to it. So this is what the research has showed. Half of your happiness level, well-being, is genetic. Either you got it or you don't, which that's a bit depressing if you don't have it. Now, I grew up with the 10%. which I'm going to credit my mother and father for this, who basically said, money is the report card of the adult life. The more you have, better off you're doing. It solves problems, it prevents problems, it's great, you have more choices, more freedom. Okay. However, here comes the challenge. If you look at that 10% as a drug, cocaine, the highest you will ever get off a hit of cocaine is that first line, and it's downhill from there. Now, what do drug addicts do, or cocaine users do, when the high isn't as good as the first time? Do they stop and pick up a new habit? What do? They take more. Well, so do we. So when I first started making money, I was really excited. So the first thing I ever spent a lot of money on was buying my mother's Mercedes. It was a beautiful car. It was this 380 SE. I always obsessed about Mercedes. And my dad got it really cheap. It was, at the time, it was worth about $65,000, but I bought it for $25,000, so it was a total deal. I was so excited to get this car. I took the train from New York, where I was living, down to Baltimore, and I was just eating, drinking, sleeping my 380 SE. Get the car, give my dad 25 grand. I was a little upset because that's what he paid for the car. My mother used it for a year, but either way, I still got a cheap deal on the car. And as I'm driving the car out of their cul-de-sac, literally I had gone maybe 500 yards. And my excitement was like a balloon going, and I could almost see the excitement just dripping out. And I'm not even on the highway yet. And I'm like, it's the steering wheel, it's the seat, radio, just a car. And I'm like, what happened? Ever since I was a kid, I was obsessing about these cars. And I finally got one. And the juice of my excitement left in like 30 seconds. So I thought, well, I need a bigger Mercedes. Or I need a new one. So in my lifetime, I've actually owned 39. I collected them. It didn't really work. The repair bills were always there. That part worked. But it took me a long time to figure out that money is basically like a drug. And the elusive thing is that it works. And it doesn't. And we go back for more. So basically the 10% is where most people spend their time. But that's not where the pot of gold is. The pot of gold is in the 40%. And that's what positive psychology focuses on. So your 50% you can't control. But this 40 is where I'm going to ask you to focus. And that's what this workshop is about. The 10%, as long as you basically are living indoors and you have a meal, you have some extra money left over, somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 a year living in Boston, you're good. You're not going to get a much higher return if you make $200,000. In fact, the higher up you go, things get worse because your life gets complicated. And then you start to worry, okay, do you like me because you like me or because you like my checking account? You start to question people's motives. At one point, I had 5 houses at one time. At that year that I had those houses, I was broken into 19 times. The police stopped coming. I would just get tickets every time the alarm went off because the people that broke in would leave by the time. Because I had a lake about an hour north of here, and it took a half an hour for the police to get to the houses. So that wasn't really a good thing. So now, in the beginning, positive psychology was really focused on the science of happiness. However, the new science has grown pretty quickly. And I encourage you to look at happiness kind of like as a firework. It's beautiful and it's cool, but it's a pop that can't last. So what they have advanced to is well-being, which is basically being kind of content, feeling basically good, but not jumping through the streets every day doing jumping jacks. And the key, the gold standard, is what they call flourishing. And flourishing is going to be a survey that we're going to be giving you in the WhatsApp group. So you'll be able to score your own personal flourishing. It's an anonymous one. But we're also going to be aggregating the classroom to see where are people flourishing and where are they not, which will give me the focus of what does the next workshop need to be focusing on. So there's actually a constellation of things that create well-being. There's 5 components. The first is positive emotions. The second is engagement or flow, really being into something. The next is positive relationships, which we'll be talking about, having meaning in your life, and accomplishments. And now CJ is going to go through to deep dive exactly what those mean.
Yeah, so PERMA is basically breaking down that 40% that we talked about that you can control into smaller categories. So first we have positive emotions. So that's not just walking around with a smile on your face, although that's nice if you're one of those people. But positive emotions is about what you feel. So it's pleasure, it's comfort, it's warmth. It's the things that you are sort of cultivating in your mind, and whether you are overall optimistic or pessimistic. And this is something that you might have a natural inclination towards one or the other, but you actually can adjust that sort of mindset for yourself. Next is engagement. And engagement is about what gives you energy, right? So it's not so much about the things that you are talented in, but the things that make you feel energized. So you might be someone who is really energized by playing music. You might be someone who is energized by being around other people. You might be energized by learning new things. So basically, engagement, number 2 of PERMA, is about being able to get into a state where you lose track of time. Has anyone ever had that happen where you're doing something so great and then time flies by? That's called flow, and that's part of engagement. So that's the second one. The third one is about relationships. Having positive, loving relationships and being loved by others, having a sense of community is something that's really important to your sense of well-being. We are social animals. We like to interact with different human beings. And this is actually probably one of the sources of a lot of people's despair these days, is being so isolated and being alone. I think there was a study that you wanted to talk about, Michael, that came out of Harvard.
This is the oldest study that Harvard ever did. In 1938, they wanted to understand what leads to a happy and healthy life. Now, what's interesting about this study is at the time that it was done, only men graduated from Harvard. Now, back in the 1930s, men didn't really talk about their emotions. That was a shameful thing. That was sort of a weakness. But what they came out with the data was it was close relationships, love, not money or fame, that led to their life satisfaction and their longevity. If you're married, you actually do live longer. It's actually protective to diseases. But what I think is interesting about the study, not only is it so long, but the fact that it was men. I would expect men not to talk about close relationships, especially from that generation. But since they did, I think it makes it even stronger that loving someone and being loved back, both ways, the two-way street, are incredibly important to your health, your well-being, and your longevity. And you can actually Google the study. It's open to the public and it's free.
So relationships. Number 4 is meaning. So having a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose in your day, feeling like what you do contributes maybe to society or to something that is greater than the self is also something that's important to your well-being. And finally, accomplishment. So winning, getting ahead, achieving something, marking something as completed, feeling like you've mastered something is that final piece of PERMA. So for you guys, we're going to figure out where you are on this map, because it's good to kind of self-assess. So we have all these passed out?
So there are people in the audience, if you could pass out PERMA slides to everyone, and I'm going to show you how to fill this out. So now that you know the definition of PERMA, for the engagement one, if you feel that you are a 10 on engagement, you're going to put a dot under the outside of the circle. If you're a 5, you're going to go into the middle. If you're a 0, you're going to go into the 0. Okay? And your circles are basically going to look like that.
So we're depending on where you guys
So
are.
if we have a 10 on B, you're going to cross the line over the meeting. If you have, let's say, 3 positive emotions, you're going to cross over.
I have like 4 months. I don't know.
So what you would do is if you felt like you were, as far as engagement, if you feel like you are not.
Raise your hand if you still need a seat.
Anything, you would probably put your line with that. If you feel like your engagement is like
Okay.
10 out of 10, you would put it up across. You do the same thing for relationships. So if my relationships are maybe at like a 5, around 8,
Raise your hand if you still need a sheet.
okay.
We're good? Okay.
Doesn't matter.
Just write 10.
0
to 10. So that's why I thought. I didn't know if we had to do the line. Ah. Engagement is like finding. Does time flow when you do something?
Oh, question.
Economic theory, yeah.
I don't. I stop. Just like so. What were you gonna put bear there? He's gonna say bear. The achievement and
Raise your hand if you need some more time. Okay.
same thing. I don't do. I'm not engaged. So I'm gonna
Me too.
Exactly. Relationships.
Sometimes.
Purposeful existence.
So, the story of this guy is to help you fill this out. So this is Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob is a famous cancer doctor. He saves lives every day. And the way he filled it out is his achievement's huge. He works at Harvard Medical and NGH. He's saving lives every day. So he gets a 10 for achievement. He just crosses the line over. His life is full of meaning. He gets wonderful thank you notes from people who would have been dead without him. So his meaning is huge. Engagement is kind of like an eight because people complain and some people aren't really happy with their outcomes, and so he's kind of stressed out. So he's not always engaged. He's kind of like been doing it for so many years. Positive emotions, pretty low. Everyone wants Dr. Bob, and there's only one Dr. Bob, and he can't scale and stuff. So he's always working. So he's not pretty happy about that. Relationships, well, since his wife hasn't seen him in a few months, she's divorcing him. So his wheel does not roll very well. Now on the outside, we might say, well, Dr. Bob's this famous guy. I mean, he must have an amazing life. He makes tons of money. Sure, where does he have time to spend that money and go on vacation? Doesn't happen. He's always in the operating room. So he's rich and miserable, and now he's about to be single. So I encourage you to take a look at this and just see if your wheel will roll. And what I did is I was kind of surprised that I kind of have a little wheel. It's a circle that rolls, but I'm basically kind of like an 8 all around. And I lied a little bit on the relationships because people lie, they do too. I have really great friends, and I don't spend enough time with them. I'll spend more time on work because work is important. Friends and socializing is goofing off. But as I was preparing this lecture, I called up my best friend in Texas, who I see maybe once every 3 years. And he said, you know what, for Thanksgiving, I'm gonna go to boring cousin Linda's house and not have a great time. But I'm not gonna go. Why don't we do it together? So I am going to Arkansas with my best friend Shelly to go camping for Thanksgiving, and we'll eat a can of beans, and it'll be amazing. So I'm actually increasing my relationships. On Sunday, I'm inviting my friends to my house to do painting. I'm a lousy painter, but I enjoy doing it. So I'm calling it abstract art class, so you can't tell whether it's any good or not. But now I'm actually taking the time to say it is important to paint ugly little pictures and have your friends come over. It is important to go camping in Arkansas. So I encourage you to look at this, and what we really want to do is try to change your behavior and your priorities to say, it's really important to have a friend. It's important to be able to call someone. So raise your hand if you made a circle. Does your life roll? A little circle is okay, but raise your hand if you're willing to share where did you end up on a low point where you're like, oh, wow, I need to work on that. Raise your hand if you're willing to share where you hit a low point. Yes, sir. Relationships. Okay. Tell us why.
I feel like I connect with people here and have good friendships here.
I have a solution for that in the last slide. It's a suggestion for a club, and you're going to fill out a survey to tell me whether or not I should start that club. Anybody else? Hunter.
I'm a little low on positive emotions, and I think it's because my achievement is not a 10. But if I work hard enough to get my achievement to a 10, my relationships are going to drop.
Yeah. Well, what you'll notice is that things are fluid, that they'll change. But once you understand how these levers work and what you can do to make the levers move, some of the things that will move these levers are not what you would expect. They're not intuitive. And we're going to share with you some of the strongest ones. Did you have your hand up? Yes.
Yeah. So when I get low on like everything.
That's opportunity for growth. It's a positive psychology class. I'm not going to tell you you're doomed. But actually, when I took the positive psychology class at Harvard, I was just like, I had a hard time getting out of bed. My thing when I was depressed is I slept. And I would normally sleep until around 1 p.m. Yeah, it's a long time. And the class started around 10. But I got out of bed and I sat in front, and when you start to see hope, when that little light goes off, like, oh my God, I can do something about this, then the hope starts, and then you get motivated to say, okay, what's the exercise? I'm going to try it. Because if I don't try it, I'm going to stay where I am, and I'm not willing to stay where I am because it's just not good enough, and I want more. So I encourage you to play around with this. I've done some really weird things that I thought would make me happier, and they didn't. I never thought that I would enjoy painting. But I will say there's a thing with Boston that you'll notice. When I went to art class, it was a Christmas present to myself. I spent $300 to go to the Cambridge Community Center for Adult Ed. And I go in and everyone's like introducing themselves. And they're all basically, amateurs. But their stuff looked good. And they kind of come to me like, why are you here? And I said, well, I just kind of want to do something that I enjoy that I'm bad at. And I'm not interested in getting any better at it. And they all looked at me, and I'm like, stop looking at me that way. I go, what is it with Cambridge and Boston? It's like, no one goes out for a jog in the city. They're all training for a half marathon, a Boston marathon. You don't go for a hike, you're training to go up Everest. Like, why do we have to be this Olympiad in everything that we do? Like, why can't you just do something that you love that you just suck at it? That's okay. So I took this class, and I was bad. But I really enjoyed kind of like those large blocks of paint, where it kind of makes like a 3D thing, and the teacher's coming over, I'm kind of doing this, and he's like, can I make a suggestion? And I go, I can't have any more fun than what I'm doing right now. So he kind of left me alone. So now I'm going to poll the class. The #1 exercise to make people have more well-being. What do you think it is? Just take a guess. What do you think one thing that you could do? Yes, sir.
Yoga?
Yoga? Okay, that's a good one. Yes. Listen? Listen to the other person. Women would love it if you did that. Yes. Yes. Laughter. Laughter's a good one. Yes. Good. Gratitude. Yes. Very, very close. That's a top 10. Yes. Meditation's good. Yes. An active workout. Yes. Endorphins. Richard. Walking. Yes. Anybody else? Music. Music is actually one of the only things that gets every area of your brain activated. Yeah, music's actually incredibly important for people. And it jumps over the neocortex, goes right into the limbic system, meaning hits emotions, which is why you can listen to a song in a second and start crying. It's a great thing to have happen. And sometimes when I was on an airplane, I was going to Asia, and I just hit this station in the plane that was like all these songs that you just like want to cry to and sing. I'm like having this moment, and the person next to me hit the call button. They thought I was having like that thing. They're like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Don't cry, it's great." Crying's actually really good for you. Doing kindness, being kind to other people. Why do you think that would work? Why would kindness be the #1 thing you could do to increase your own well-being? You'll feel good. Yes, it's actually, in my opinion, this isn't tested, it's the most selfish thing you can do. Because you feel so good. And you're allowed to. It's okay to question your motives. You don't have to be Mother Teresa. I mean, I could do something really nice for you, and in the back of my head knowing, I'm going to get more out of this than you will. That's okay. That's okay to do that. You don't have to be a saint. But doing something kind for someone else will be the #1 thing you can do to pop yourself. Also, anxiety and depression, you have to be thinking inward. To think that way, you must be thinking about yourself. It's a very self-centered activity. But if you're doing a kindness for someone else, you're thinking outward. And your anxiety will stop because you're focused out on someone else. So if you're having a panic attack, call up someone and ask them if they need some help with something. Raking the leaves, advice, listening, just getting out of your own head would actually work. There's tons of volunteer opportunities in Boston. Just do something that you like, not something that you know is good for you. Do something that you really enjoy. So what we're going to ask you to do is in 48 hours, find one unexpected kind thing to do tomorrow and just do it. So I'm going to ask you to just think about it. Now, my first idea that I had was tomorrow when I come here for lunch, or to teach, I mean, at lunch, I was going to go to the person behind me and say, I've got this homework to do. Do I have permission to buy you your lunch? This would be my kindness. So that was my first idea. However, Gonzalo gave me a better idea. He came to me before this talk and said, I'm going to miss the talk, but I really wanted to come. And I said, we're going to tape it for you. And I mentioned that my friend Richard was going to come. So Richard, could you stand up for this kind of brief with people? So Richard is a headmaster at Boston Public Schools. And he was telling me, we're taking a workshop in another program together. That's where I met Richard. And he said that some of the students don't like holidays because they can't come to school. Like, school is actually the best part of their life. It's a safe space. It's where they do well, where they thrive. And so it can be risky for them to have summer vacation and to have a holiday. So I got in the back of my head, what if I taught this at Richard's school? And I mentioned it to Gonzalo. I said, there's a guy coming, and I said, I'm going to offer to teach this at his high school on holidays and summer vacation, and change it for a high school cohort. And he said, oh, could we do that together? And I was like, well, sure, but why? And he goes, well, you know, could Hult be a part of it? And I'm thinking branding, maybe get students to come to the school. And he goes, well, we're supposed to do community outreach. And I said, sure, you know, more the merrier. And he goes, also, we're looking to give merit scholarships to high school students. And I was like, oh. So this might actually lead to a student in Boston getting a free 100% scholarship to Hult. So I think that's going to be my kindness. So I'm going to bring Hult into the Boston public school system to do the community project for Gonzalo. Maybe a student could get a free ride here. But if I could make students feel safer and have a better time, then why not? So that's my kindness. You don't have to do something that big. I'm just kind of on a roll with this thing. But I encourage you to think of something small. But what we're going to ask you to do for the next 2 or 3 minutes is brainstorm with your neighbor or your table. What kind of kindness would you be willing to do? It could be really tiny. That's okay. We just want to get to the experience of doing something kind for someone else. So take about 2 or 3 minutes with your table and just kind of brainstorm something that you would be willing to do.
What we thought of the table was to go
Guys, can you hear? Sorry.
what we thought of doing is to find like a couple homeless people. Obviously, the hardest to find in Cambridge, so we think of one like Back Bay in Boston, where you can see a little more, and to buy them like a meal, to get them lunch or dinner or just help out.
Great.
So that's a good idea.
Okay, awesome.
Beautiful.
Anyone else? have
Anyone
one?
else? Hunter, what'd you come up with?
Oh, hi.
Hi, on the spot.
I realize that I've been working a lot, and
We all realize that.
my personal relationship has suffered, so I will actually take my girlfriend out on a date and not make an excuse that something came up.
And now he's told all of us, so we're going to hold him accountable for that. And speaking of the importance of accountability, we have a WhatsApp group. This is the QR code for it. This is a group that you all can join purely for the purpose of announcing what your act of kindness will be. So we're not going to join and then announce our act of kindness and then have a long dialogue about it. What a great idea. Oh, that's great. I'm going to like this. I'm going to do that. That's not what it's about. It's not about blowing up your phone. It's not about seeking a like, right? It's about putting a commitment out there so that it's there and it's there for you to follow up on your own. It's also a place where we could share another resource or two or let you know if and when there might be the next workshop that's coming. So feel free to join us. Feel free to, anytime between now and within the next 48 hours, put out there what your commitment is to your act of kindness so that it's out there for the group. Okay? All right, so another question for you guys. Show me by a raising of your hand and how many fingers you can hold up of how many people you could call at 4 in the morning to tell your troubles to. 1, 0, 5. Do you need 2 hands? We're waking a lot of people up in the middle of the night. Okay. Awesome. So studies show that the more people you have in your life that you can bring up at 4 in the morning and tell your troubles to, the longer you are likely to live. Right?
You only need one. You only need one finger. My mom and dad are 2 fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine.
As long as you have somebody.
Yep. So this, if you have this ability, to feel like you can reach out to people and be vulnerable in the middle of the night, that goes back to the master strength of capacity to be loved. So we've talked a tiny little bit about strengths, but one thing that we'll share with you after this session in that WhatsApp group is something called Via Character Strengths. And it's a free assessment, and it lets you know what your top strengths are according to your character. It's really great insight to have so that it can help you get closer to achieving flow, right? We talked about earlier how when you are doing things that give you lots of energy and make you feel really great, that can be something that can get you into flow, that can kind of facilitate engagement. So another study that was done by John Cacioppo, who is a social neuroscientist, was a focus on loneliness, right? And what they found was that relationships are fundamental to well-being. We talked about this when we talked about PERMA, the R, relationships, and that loneliness is actually disabling. What is actually surprising as well is that this is incredibly common for millennials. We spend a lot of time in younger generations on our phones, in a digital space, not physically connected to others. And so we can't be too surprised that people are feeling super lonely. But this is a little bit shocking. Is anyone surprised by that generations that are younger are feeling more and more lonely than older ones? Not surprised. Why are you not surprised?
We are the generation.
Yeah.
Because you are the generation. Yeah. So 48,000 college students in this survey. Actually, do you want to talk about this, Michael?
Sure. So this is almost 50,000 students, and it's only 2 years old. Over 2/3 reporting that they felt very sad, lonely, anxiety, over half hopeless. The reason that the loneliness is actually dangerous is that that puts that group at an incredibly high risk for addiction of drug and alcohol use. The opposite of addiction is now considered to be connection, which they really haven't quite figured out the whole addiction thing. There's a lot of competing thoughts about it, but people are starting to kind of gather into social isolation and loneliness sets people up for being vulnerable to addiction. And if you want to get out of that, having social connection can actually be incredibly helpful. So loneliness is actually pretty risky. And that's why we want to do something at the end on our last slide on how to fix that at Hult.
Yeah, so you guys were spot on when we talked about what increases loneliness. It's social media. Social media can have a large effect on your brain. And it's really interesting. I see this even in building teams at different organizations and trying to help people communicate across generations. A lot of older generations are frustrated by younger generations and that seeking instant gratification, right? The idea of kind of being a critic, being able to immediately say, I like this or I don't like it, right? Has anyone ever put up a post on social media and then taken it down later? I won't ask why, but we could guess, right? We're looking for that constant feedback. And when you don't get it, when you seek gratification outside of yourself and you don't have a good, stable well-being to start with, it can really start to affect you and it can lead to depression. So less social media is something that can help you fight loneliness, right? Connecting in real life, being less focused on the digital space, because it leads to less social comparison and therefore less anxiety and depression, right? So social relationships and species survival, we talked about this. We talked about how we are a very social species, how we want to connect with each other, how it's something that is important to our survival. It is inherent because of the way that we came from tribal society, that if we are alone, we have this fear that we have been deserted, that we will not survive. That's something that's pretty inherent within all of us. So being able to connect to people is something that is neurologically a part of us, and it's something that's really important to our well-being. So, are you flourishing the quiz?
Sure. So to finish up a little bit on the social media, I'm not really connected to social media. Wasn't really my thing. But I was at my cousin Linda's Thanksgiving, the one that I'm not going to this year. And now she's 60, so she's not in your age group. And we're having the most boring time. Everyone's just kind of sitting around, and I'm just like ready to go. She's not talking. She gets out her phone. She's 60 years old. She gets out her phone, and she starts taking pictures of all the food. I'm like, what are you doing? And my sister's like, oh, you're supposed to be on Facebook. So when we leave, I look at my sister's Facebook, and it looked like the best Thanksgiving you've ever had. These beautiful dishes, because she's actually a good cook. Everything looked amazing, and I'm like, this was an awful time. But the BS that she posted on Facebook, like, oh, this is what happens. And it got me thinking, you know, who posts on Facebook, hey, look at this massive zit I grew overnight. Look at this thing. Look how fat I am now. People don't do that. They always show you the good stuff. So you're kind of getting fake news, but I get it. I understand it. But and then we're not going to tell you not to do something. We're just informing you what is happening based on your current behaviors. And I would invite you to play around with airplane mode for an hour and just see how you feel. There's actually a beautiful walk out of Hult when you go over that weird bridge, I think, into Charlestown. I hardly ever go that way, but it's actually really pretty. I encourage you just to kind of spend a little time doing that. It's also why our WhatsApp group specifically says no likes, please. Just put in what your kindness is, what you're going to do. We're also not going to be doing a lot of posting on the WhatsApp group. We're only going to be putting in things that we think are going to be of benefit to you. So now what we'd like to do is see if you're flourishing. And flourishing means you have the 5 pillars, but we want to see exactly where you are on it. So this is the quiz, which I'll pop up in a second. It's only 9 questions. You're going to be recording a 1 or a 0. But what we'd like you to do is do the survey monkey, which is anonymous. So if you pop your phone on this now, and after you're done with that, I'm going to put back the other slide if you don't want to do the survey monkey. Everyone got it? Okay. And while you take the survey, just write down a 1 or a 0 on your 7. So when you do the QR code, that'll bring you to the Survey Monkey. And then on your paper, just record what answers you're putting in. And it tells you what the score is. Everyone got it? Did you get it? Okay. Did it work on you? You got it now? Anyone else need it? Got it, Pablo? Raise your hand if you're going to be doing the quiz just by hand, not the Survey Monkey. So these are the questions here.
Michael, can we go back for one more second?
Yeah, sure. You good?
Got it? Yeah.
We should maybe switch that up. This is such a Samsung thing. Sorry, fraction. What is it? Invalid thing. They sent it to the
You sent the link.
Finish a survey. You see everyone that was basically down. Samsung. Samsung Pay. You have the same for you like this. Really this one's like blurry with yeah. Whoa, that's crazy. What do you Yeah.
So we'll do it one more minute. I just pulled up the Survey Monkey. So far we have about 80 surveys in. So we'll actually have a good sample. Does anyone still need this?
Okay, so Michael is going to aggregate the results for us so we can kind of see where we stand. But in the meantime, I want to talk to you about happiness and well-being across the globe. So I'm curious, does anyone have a guess? We're looking right now at the prevalence of flourishing countries across Europe.
Denmark.
Denmark? Okay, Denmark, raise your hand. Do you know that it's Denmark? Tell me more. Why do you know it's Denmark? You had it in class? Yeah, they both have happiness. They wanted happiness thing. They did. They ended up being one of the happiest reported countries. This is from almost 10 years ago, but data stays the same. And Nordic countries tend to come in really high. Has anyone ever been to a part of the world that didn't have a lot of money, but you felt like the people were really happy? Yep.
Colombia.
Colombia. Okay.
Kenya.
Kenya.
Indonesia.
Indonesia. They come very high in happiness. Yep. I lived in South Africa. Happy people. any idea as to why that might be? Thinking about those specific countries? Any thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes if everybody's equally poor,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like it increases happiness.
Sure, okay. Not comparing to someone else? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. A lot of connections. So that's interesting because as far as Denmark coming in as one of the happiest countries in business for Europe, I mean, even still looking at the scale here, this is just up to 35%. So not tons of people are reporting themselves as flourishing to begin with, but in Denmark, what the people tend to report is that there's a lot of trust amongst the people, right? But they all tend to trust each other. And that's something that they teach in their schools as well. A lot of people have lots of great relationships, right? And there's connection. A lot of these countries have super high taxes, right? They're not hanging on to a lot of their money, but they're still okay with that. And when we think back to PERMA, and we think back to that model of what contributes to your well-being, what you actually have is only what, 10%, right? So it's a little more about mindset. Did you have something you wanted to add? I'm sorry.
I think that also people don't have long working hours.
Yep.
Also more relaxed.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. And a lot of it has to do with expectations. And this is true of a lot of the Nordic countries, that what you might not expect to be the billionaire. You might not expect to have every day be amazing. You understand that sometimes it's light, sometimes it's dark. There it's dark a lot of the year, right? But when your expectations are different, what you need feels a little bit different. And that has to do with your mindset, and it has to do with what you are focusing on. So another practice that Marty Seligman talks about is focusing on what went well. And this is something, I think a gentleman in the group talked about, you who talked about gratitude? Yeah, so that's the same thing, gratitude or what went well exercise. And this is something that can be really powerful for you. If you actually make this your homework for the next 7 days, to write down 3 things that went well for you in your day, and you stay with that, 6 months from now, you would be reporting less anxiety, less depression, and overall well-being. And this is something, what's great about this and what's a little different from going to therapy is that this sort of builds on itself, right? Does anyone write down things that went well for themselves? Yeah, do you? Regular basis? Do you write it down? Do you keep it in a journal?
I have a gratitude.
You have a gratitude journal. How does that work for you?
That's great. Very good.
Every day, right? And it's kind of addicting in and of itself. And I find when I don't feel like writing something down, I just read. And that's a really great story.
And it just becomes so.
It totally does. So I'm going to ask that you guys practice this right now. Will you flip over your piece of paper, and I'm going to ask you to write down, you can write down 1, but 1, 2, 3, what went well for you today, okay? So go ahead and do that. And it could be,
You can do that.
it could be that you really love your cup of coffee. It could be that you're really good at
You feel so here.
Not that you
You're having a bad day.
I'm trying to study. You did have that.
I never really.
Well, I don't accomplish.
Oh, I have to.
Ooh, we went to
Start
Starbucks.
for like 14 minutes.
Yeah, I actually saw it. Did you cook it?
We actually.
It was takeout like yesterday.
Like I did.
Half
I
of-
touched
half
you. I even went to
One
your
third.
house. But
Okay, for those of us who wrote something down, does anyone want to share what went well with your day? Yeah.
Good
Who got that? Who got it? High standards. Good. What else? Yeah. Say it again.
I found parking right next to the building. You only have to pay for a half an hour because the meters are free.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yay.
Anyone else? What went well? Yes. Amazing, done. All right, yes.
Just having fun with friends.
How do you clean the end of the class? This is an internship. Congratulations. That's great. So it's nice when people clap for you too, right? That external gratification. But when you guys were writing this down, how did it feel for you? Good, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I just want to add in, one of the suggestions that we're going to have to starting a club is a What Went Well club. And I'd like to practice it now to see what you think. You just did it, where someone shares what went well. You're not bragging. You're just sharing what went well and why, which is starting to identify what strengths you have. So why did you get the internship?
Couple things. Let's say that initially I was talking to this person. It was turned out to be the CEO of a marketing agency. And I was like,
I asked the question the wrong way.
Yeah.
What strength did you have? That passion. So what we want to do in the What Went Well exercise is I got an internship because I was passionate about getting it. And then the applause. Let's try it again. A lot of us, especially perfectionists, don't do well with applause or being recognized. And that's something that I would encourage you to learn how to discard, because that's the first step in learning how to be loved. Because a lot of us don't feel like we're worth it. I felt that way. It's not an uncommon feeling. But the What Went Well Club will be just this, where you share with us what went well, what strength you had to maybe get that. Then we're going to applaud for you. And that's the club I want to start. Who else would like to share? What went well today? Who else? Melina, what went well for you and why?
Okay, so I was able to talk with one of my best friends and vent about the terrible real estate agent experience I had. So I felt better.
And what strength was that?
Strength.
How did that good event happen? Would it be something like listening
Oh, yeah.
or reframing? Taking it a different way? Okay, nice job. So if you have time to think about it, I'm going to ask Anne, and then Peter, Anya, Rose, and Tom. So Anne, would you like to start? What went well and why?
I went to actually open lunch today with my friends on coming from South Africa. And I think why is because I have I think I get on really well with people and I bonded very well with them.
Very nice.
So for work, we got our country leaders from Mexico and Brazil on the agreement with Hult. I persuaded them.
Excellent. Yes! Hunter.
Another one?
Yeah, why not?
I had a work meeting at my house to keep people from being distracted, and it went so well. It was so much fun.
Excellent, good for you. We did have good weather today. Excellent. Yes. Oh, that's good. Oh, cool. Okay, so this is the club that I'd like to start, and then there's a second club that I want to do, and they can actually merge. But you've got the taste of the club that I want to start here. So now let's take a look at the data. So this is question number 1. This is basically testing for positive emotion. Taking all things together, how happy would you say you are? So it looks about 70% of the group is happy. So this is going to get 1 point. Positive emotion, that's pretty good. Engagement, loving to learn new things. The almost perfect score, 100. Now the first 3 are the most important. These are cores. Number 3, meaning and purpose. 60% yes, 40% no. This is something that would be needed to be worked on because you need all of the first 3 to flourish. These are like core and foundational. You have to have positive emotion. You're just slightly happier than you are sad, so that one's okay. We kind of have that one. Definitely have engagement, so that's good. Meaning needs some work. 83 people took this, and it's basically this group and a few people that are connected with Zoom in other countries. So there's something you can actually do about that. Self-esteem. Now the rest of these, you only need 3 of the 6. So this is kind of like being at the buffet. You get to choose like 3 sides. So self-esteem. So this is not unusual. Actually, there's a book I can recommend called The 7 Pillars of Self-Esteem. That would be really helpful to up it because there's actually 7 characteristics to it. And you can see which pillar of the 7 you might be having a challenge with. Optimism. I'm always optimistic about my future. This is pretty high. I got to know on this. I'm really good at doomsday. And I've always feared being homeless. I never have been, but that's just sort of this thing I get obsessed about with no real reason. Jack, you got that one too, right? Yeah, okay, I'll meet you at the shelter. Number 6, resilience. When things go wrong, it takes me a long time to get back. About 60%. You would actually be surprised at how well people bounce back from adversity. We underestimate that. Vitality, feeling strong and active. For a young group, I'm a little bit surprised at that. It's almost 50-50. So that's something that's another thing that we would want to be working on. Self-determination, you make choices in your life. So again, this one, 60 to 40, that will be another area for growth. Positive relationships, there's people in my life who really care about me. This is great. This is one of the most important ones. So having just one friend is actually important. If you don't have any, then that really means that's something that you would actually, what I would suggest people do is find a hobby that you like and do it in a group. So if you like painting, you can actually paint in a group. If you like meditating, which seems like a solitary thing, you can go to the Shambhala Center in Brookline. If you do yoga in your dorm room or at home, there's tons of yoga classes. There are community yoga classes in pretty much every yoga studio in Boston, which means one class every afternoon is about $5. And they always have that $30 30-day deal. The way to hack that is you go to one studio for a month, and you go to another studio for a month. Anyhow. So now let's talk about mythbusters. Things that people seem to think would make you happy or sad. And I'm going to show you some data that's going to flip that on its head. So this is data, it's split up by gender on men and women, the effect of life events on your life satisfaction. Marriage. Now this is basically, if you take a look at this red line, this is before the wedding and this is after. The best you can do is on your wedding day, it's kind of a slow drip down from there. So what you might want to do if you want to hack this is get engaged, have the party, and then go meet someone else and kind of do it again. What's a little bit disappointing is that on average, women are actually a little bit unhappy with their marriage 5 years into it, and guys are sort of, at the 0 line. So that's sort of an interesting one. Next is divorce. I can't tell you how many people are afraid of having a divorce because they're going to break up the family, and I made a commitment, and blah, blah, blah. I get it. But look how you spike, and then you go out there to divorce court. People are happy. When I was a money manager, I had a trader named Kathleen, and she divorced her husband because he kept threatening suicide. It was his way of controlling her, and she just got kind of tired of the notes on the front door that said, if I'm not here, don't go into the bathroom because of the mess. That kind of stuff. It was making it all up. But anyhow, so she gets a divorce and then had a lot of money and it was not contested. So she went to court in Boston and she did it on her own. And she comes back and she's in this great mood. She'd been miserable before. And I'm like, why are you in a good mood? And she goes, you should have seen all the women in divorce court. They get their papers stamped by the judge and they're like dancing down the aisle. And one woman was singing free at last, free at last. So it was kind of fun. So if your marriage isn't great, don't worry about, oh, broken family, I'm divorced and single, no one's ever gonna love me again. The data shows that you'll love it when you get rid of them. So don't be afraid of it. Now this is a really dangerous one. This is actually the worst slide. Unemployment, especially for men, long-term unemployment is really, really depressing. And this kind of makes sense for me. Even though I was retired, I called myself unemployed. And I kind of was, because I had nothing to do. And I wasn't earning money, and I felt kind of guilty about the money I had saved. It was a very weird time, not recommended. But unemployment for men, this is 5 years into it, this is actually pretty bad on the depression scale. So if you find yourself unemployed, you may want to consider taking a job within a year of unemployment just for the sake of having a job, earning money, and saying, I got a job. Because it doesn't sound really good but for 5 years when you go, well, I'm in transition. You all know what that means. So don't worry about it. Being a widow, this is a surprising one. This is the resilience of people. So this is unhappiness. So when you know, let's say 5 years, 4 years before your partner is dying, so let's say this is like a long-term illness. Like my Aunt Mary had, her husband had Alzheimer's, and she was miserable up until the time he died. But right after they died, people spring up, which they don't expect. And my Uncle Bobby actually died almost a year ago. And his wife, Laura, she wasn't terribly happy like ever. She was okay. 6 months after Uncle Bobby died, he had a pretty long cancer thing with prostate cancer. He was about 60, Laura's about 60 as well. 6 months after he died, Laura lost 150 pounds. And I had never seen the woman smile longer than 15 seconds. And I was almost like, I think she's glad this happened. Now, a lot of people don't want to talk about emotions that aren't very popular, but think about it. Imagine the burden that was lifted when Bobby died. I mean, she's changing his diapers, and she knows the end's coming. I mean, that doesn't feel good. So if you are concerned, there is contrary data to this that people after long-term marriages, they will die within a year of their partner dying. That actually happened with the first President Bush. I believe that was within a year. But don't be afraid of someone dying. Actually, you will recover. The worst part is before they die. Birth of a child, this is you. They're not loving it. The best time is when you were born, and then it's downhill from here. So this is only going, now this sort of makes sense, for the mothers. So you can get postpartum depression in here, the terrible twos, blah, blah, blah. But it looks like mommy wasn't as happy with you as daddy was. But you're not thrilling anybody. But when I was growing up, my mother had this mantra she said every day, don't have children, they're not worth it. And I always took it as advice. I never took it personally that I was annoying her. But I was, yeah. I wasn't her favorite. So now let's move into the economics of positive psychology. Now we're going to kind of flip this into the last module of the workshop, and it's the money. So this is the Easterlin paradox. It's named after Richard Easterlin. The first thing he said made a lot of sense. Inside of a society, rich people are happier than poor people. Okay, you can kind of get that. However, rich societies tend not to be happier than poor societies. And you supported that data when CJ asked, are there countries that have lower GDP than the United States, and you think they're happier than us? A lot of hands went up. When I went to the Philippines this year and Vietnam, I was like, they're peaceful. They're happy. They don't have a lot. Even when I was in Armenia, 2 years ago, I had one day off, and you got me a driver. This is Roxy. She had me teaching in Armenia. And I had one day off, and she got me a driver. And he took me around to some of the sites. I don't think I told you this, but he was a nice guy, and he said, why don't you come to my house for tea? And I said, okay. So we drive to his house. This was actually a lesson about poverty. And I thought I was being ambushed. It looked like it was a warehouse. It didn't look like a home. It was bad. I walk in, and it wasn't well decorated at all. You know, there was like plastic on the couches and stuff. But everyone was really nice to me. And they were very kind. They took out the nice china and gave me tea. There's this little boy on this little bike in the family room, maybe 3 years old, happy as could be, just going back and forth, back and forth. And I said, so during this, I had to use the bathroom. So I said, can I use the bathroom? He goes, yeah, I have to change the plug, the hose. Okay. So he goes into the shower room, takes the garden hose, unhooks it from the shower, and moves it over to the toilet, and hooks up the water to the toilet. Okay. And I thought, you know, these people are happier than I am. And they have like next to nothing. And that was when I got the concept of, I think poverty is a mindset. I don't think it's actually economic. I think it's how you think about it. And I wonder if it's a good thing to have the internet in these countries showing people super yachts. I don't know if that would give them an aspiration or show them where they are in a ranking of comparisons. I don't know the answer to that. But I actually learned that there is no link between how I feel about poverty and being homeless with Jack at the shelter and how much money I have. Because we probably have always lived indoors and always had a meal. So I think it's a mindset. I don't actually think it is true economics. And then the last one is that as countries get richer, they don't get happier. And we've actually seen that in the United States. We're definitely not anywhere near where Denmark is. But if you look at data in a certain way, if you look at money going up and average life satisfaction, it looks like, okay, more money, more happy. Okay, got it. But what if you look at it this way? Hong Kong, the residents of Hong Kong are no happier than people living in Myanmar. Okay. And the United States isn't as happy as Costa Rica, who has about a third of what we have. So there's this weird loose link. And I think it's how we're measuring things. I think we might be measuring it wrong. Take a look at emotional well-being, which is what they did not measure for that. This is actually your emotion, your joy, your sadness, anger, affection. But life evaluation is what they tested for, what you think about your life. So imagine being married to someone, you live in a mansion, you have a Rolls Royce, yada, 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 and they're emotionally abusive. You're ugly. Why did I ever marry you? You're an anchor around my neck. I can't stand you. I'm not going to get a divorce because I'm going to give you half my money. You think that person's happy? They might say, life evaluation. Wow, I'm wealthy, I'm privileged, I live in a nice house, I'm provided for. They didn't ask if my partner makes me feel like crap. But you can be rich and miserable at the same time. So I think we're actually measuring the wrong thing. If we look at the last half century in the United States, GDP has tripled. Life satisfaction has stayed the same, and depression is up 1,000%. And by the way, when you take an antidepressant, it doesn't make you happy. It makes you flat. You stop having emotions. What actually gave me the incentive to stop taking my antidepressants is when my best friend Bobby died. He died of cancer. I'm looking in the coffin, and I didn't feel anything. I was sad. I was logically sad. The only emotion I had was a glimpse of embarrassment because all my friends were crying. Bobby was only 50, and he was funny as could be. He was the funniest guy I ever met. He was a great friend. And I was like, what's wrong with me? I'm like, oh my God, it's the mood stabilizers. And so I looked at Bobby and I said, you're dead and I'm not living and I'm gonna stop taking these pills. And I did, and that's when I went to study positive psychology and mind-body medicine and orthomolecular medicine, food medicinal function, and it worked. So I encourage you, if you are taking antidepressants, and this is getting way out of my depth, I'd encourage you to get a book called The Mood Cure. The Mood Cure is food to enhance your mood, and they have diagnostic tests where they'll tell you which nutrients you're deficient in. So if you have anxiety, you must be low in magnesium. So there's actually some chemical things. My depression was actually nutritional deficiencies, because I was eating out at restaurants every night, drinking a lot of alcohol, which actually wipes lots of the happy chemicals out of your body and just keep them out. And vitamins don't really work. You just urinate them out. You actually need the food mixed with fat for them to be absorbed by the body. The cool thing about the Mood Cure is that the food is absolutely delicious. Like it's basically kind of like grandma's home cooking, but they'll say things like, have a fistful of chicken, a fistful of protein every 6 hours, which would be like 3 eggs or a chicken breast, but you have to have the skin on the chicken breast, because you need the fat for the absorption. So the food is actually delicious, and I lost weight, which was weird, but basically because the antidepressants made me gain weight. Alexander.
Another good question. Out of like the top 1 or 2% of the top rich people, how many people, percentage-wise, do you think are managed to be happy and rich, not rich and depressed or sad? And I believe it's
Truly happy?
Somewhat happy. I mean, not sad, not on every day.
I mean, I would think that you'd have at least 20%, but the challenge with, when I was a money manager, I had some billionaires for clients, and I didn't think they had fully developed emotional systems.
Even the not really like rich people.
Right, but there's things like when I got a divorce, I had to have 4 bodyguards for 1 year, and that's not nice. So your life gets really complicated. You know, being robbed, having people steal from you, things get. I think there's a sadness on being super wealthy because you have a complicated life.
So you think 20%?
That's my guess, but I don't have any, and I think they would lie about it too. Yes.
I was at the point my boyfriend comes from Luxembourg, and Luxembourg is like tiny and very wealthy, and everybody gets the maximum money for study or whatever. And his father used to be an investment banker, and he became an alcohol person. He had a very high level of life, earning very well, but the stress levels were so unmanageable. He became alcoholic. His neighbor committed suicide. He hung himself on the right side. He was dropped, and they had to move out. It's very good. You would never expect that kind of disaster in such a wealthy country, but it comes to. And his father, when he stopped working there, he started to rush in, started to travel around, and now he's so much more fun.
It's kind of weird. That's why I like to study positive psychology. That I didn't know that my problem was I didn't have a job. It had nothing to do with money. Like I don't make nearly what I make when I was a money manager, but I feel like I matter now. And I don't feel like I have transactional relationships with my students. With my clients, it was transactional. To give you an example, in 1998, I made my clients 110%. In the first quarter of 1999, I was flat, and we had made no money, and I lost $40 million in assets. My income dropped almost $1 million. And these are people that stiffed me on the management fees. And I had 2 clients who sued me because I didn't make them 25% in Q1. And it's like, this is my life. Like if I'm not hitting a home run every second of the day, you're gonna leave, stiff me on the bill, or sue me. I don't want to help you. I don't want to be a part of that anymore. So I don't make nearly as much, but I have a ton of satisfaction. I mean, I really enjoy being here. And I really like teaching at Harvard. I just kind of like what I do. And what's funny is I like beginners and I like younger people because I can teach you more stuff. When I've taught CEOs at Executive Ed, if they get one little goodie out of me in 2 days, they're like, yeah, I got a little thing out of you. Thanks. It's not the appreciation. And when I was living in China last year, I mean, I was signing autographs, which was like, okay, I'm not a rock star, but I felt appreciated. And the people really value education there much more than this country. And it feels good to be valued. So next, here is money and life satisfaction. And what you'll notice with these countries is when you go from 10 grand to 20 grand, the happiness really spikes because you start to get some basic needs met. But then that line starts to arc over and flatten out. Here's Luxembourg. Yeah. So the line starts to flatten. So really, in the world, 20,000 is where it starts to break. And I say for Boston, you're somewhere around 75,000 to 100,000. Okay. So basically, money makes you happier until you have enough. And here's my theory on money. It's taken me years to figure this out. I think money is like food. You must have it to survive. You must have some food to survive. However, too much, trouble comes. Get fat, get diabetes, trouble comes out of it. Same thing with money. You must have it, but once you have enough, once your belly's kind of full, and you have the basic needs met, you've got some extra for like some splurges. Maybe I want to take Uber home tonight, not Uber Pool, but the real one. Okay. So maybe I want to take you out to dinner because it's like a really special night, and I don't want to worry about it. Having that little extra and something for an emergency, then you're fine. But having two houses, it kind of sucks. And people don't talk about it because I felt really obligated to go to my weekend house every weekend because I had a weekend house. And I didn't travel a lot. And then I have like one sock at the weekend house, the other sock at the apartment in Boston. And I was always worried about one or the other. So I really wouldn't recommend getting a second home. I'd probably recommend getting Airbnb and go traveling to different places because it gets boring to go to the same place. So here's a study that Barbara Fredrickson did. She's pretty famous in the positive psychology side. Her assistant researcher came up with the Losada ratio. They studied 60 companies. 20 were doing well, 20 were doing okay, and 20 were failing. They transcribed the meetings and they did a ratio of positive to negative words. And they found if your organization was 3 to 1 on positive to negative words, those companies were doing well. Less than 3 to 1, not doing well. And this actually works for sports as well. You can actually predict when a sports team will stop a losing streak. So let's say you have a team where they keep losing. And I interview you and I go, hey, you're a player. Well, why'd you lose? And if he says, because the umpire sucks. Okay, that's a positive comment. That's actually predicted that they're going to win. If I go to your team, say, hey, why'd you lose? And you go, our team's not good. We don't really have a good lineup. That's a negative word. So just by looking at the newspapers and watching the interviews, seeing whether the players are positive or negative. Also, predicting divorce. The number one predictor of divorce is contempt of your partner, when you look at them contemptuously. And the Losada ratio is crazy. For you to have a happy marriage, it needs to be 5 to 1. 5 positive words to 1 negative word. And if you're under 3, that's still positive. According to the data, you're heading for divorce. So it has to be 5 to 1. Which I thought was a shockingly high number, and I double-checked it. But yeah, 5 to 1 will give you a happy marriage. So it's kind of no wonder why half of us get divorced. And then as we finish up for tonight, I believe that we could consider a class here called Positive Business, where we take PERMA and add on profit. So what if a corporate culture said, we're not just here to increase the returns for our stakeholders and investors, but we're here to increase the well-being of anyone who comes in contact with our organization. The customers, the investors, people who work here. You spend a third of your life working. Imagine if you loved it. Imagine if part of its corporate purpose was to help you thrive and flourish. And we can do that. And I think that's something that we should consider. But a positive business class doesn't exist. But I pitched it to Gonzalo before this, and he was into it. I think I'd also like to pitch a class on positive leadership, where the first step that you're probably going to do, either as entrepreneurs or business people, is you're going to start to manage people. And if you see that part of your job is to make sure that the people who work for you thrive under your stewardship, as opposed to you're giving them money, they do whatever you want, changing that now you're a servant to them, I think that could actually change how we exist in this country. And finally, we'd like a feedback survey for you. It's only going to be those 5 questions. One is, do you want to have these workshops on a monthly basis? And they will be different themes. There's actually about 50 different workshops we can do. The next is, do you want a positive psychology class at Hult? We split it between undergrad, grad, summer, nano, online. Do you want positive business courses? We already had a taste of the What Went Well Club. I'd like to know if you'd like that. And finally is the mastermind group. And that was one of the most popular clubs I started at Harvard. And here's how it works. You walk into a group, let's say this table here, and I have a challenge. I have something I can't figure out. It doesn't matter whether it's personal or professional. And I take 2 to 3 minutes and just spill it to the group. Within that, I explain what kind of solution I'm willing to take. So let's say I go in here and say, hey, I'm 20 pounds overweight and I want to get rid of that. And I'm not willing to go to the gym, but I will change my diet. You're like, okay, so no workout routines, but maybe I'll become a vegan. Okay, so I tell you what I'm willing to do for a solution. Then you ask more questions for clarification. I take myself and my self-limiting beliefs out of the room for 15 minutes while you brainstorm on my solution. I come back and don't speak, but my phone is on voice record and it passes around to the group where you give me your suggestions. And then I say thank you. Then we go to the next person. We don't have any crosstalk because then you'll never get finished. It takes about 20 minutes per person. And it's probably the most popular group I ever started. I couldn't understand why people were staying at these meetings for 8 hours at night. They were 1-hour meetings and people were staying 7 hours later. High energy, leaving at 2 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't figure it out. And here's why. Everyone's engaged. Obviously, when I have the spotlight on me, I'm loving it, I get all this attention. Well, what about everyone else? You're experts. You're absolute experts telling me what to do, how to live a life better, and I want that. So whether you get the spotlight on yourself or you're being the expert telling other people how to live a better life, you feel valued at every position in the club. And I think we could mix these clubs where we would open up with what went well and then we shift over into a mastermind group. So if that's something that you would like, we'd like it on the feedback survey. And that's the end of our workshop. And on behalf of CJ and myself, I want to thank you for spending the time with us today.